Um, hello to all, and it's a pleasure to be in front of you presenting the research we've been doing on transportation equity.
Doctor, do you have the mic on? Is there a green light on?
It's on, but maybe
yeah.
Is it
Can
better?
you pull it closer? Pull it
Sure.
closer to you. Pull the mic closer to you.
Is it working now?
That's better. Yes.
Okay. I've heard today that many of you have been concerned about what is next, and we are highlighting the issues that we see in the city of Dallas. This presentation is a work in progress, but will be telling us some of the solutions as we talk about, and some of the alternatives to the way we are shaping our city and making decisions now. So let me start with housing affordability. We all know that housing is considered affordable if 30% of income is spent on housing, and it's unaffordable if more than 30% is spent on housing, and it's widely, internationally even, is accepted as a measure of housing affordability, this 30% threshold. But the question is, how about transportation costs? How about the value of location efficiency and transportation affordability? Well, if you look at the household's expenditure list of items, transportation is the second highest expenditure item after housing, with about 17 to 18% of household income going to transportation, but is often ignored when we talk about affordability. And the reason is, when you talk about housing, you're talking about a big chunk of money that goes into mortgage or rental, monthly rental, portion. When it comes to transportation, it's small pieces of money going to gasoline price, insurance, registration, maintenance, and so we keep ignoring transportation cost and the importance of transportation. What is happening is that we are making our cities relatively more affordable in terms of housing. As you see, the green areas, about 70% of block groups in Dallas are considered affordable in terms of housing. People spend less than 30% on housing. When it goes to transportation, the entire city is red, with little islands of green, affordable areas. Only 12% of our block groups in the city of Dallas are considered affordable in terms of transportation. And this is for middle class, median income households, a typical household. I was curious to see, how does it work for low income population? People who depend on affordable housing units for their housing needs. And I did a national study of looking at two largest affordable housing programs in the U.S., low-income housing tax credit and Section 8 multifamily. Found the location of them, geocoded them on the map one by one, and created a buffer, 3 buffers, quarter mile, half mile, and 1 mile around them, and modeled transportation costs using the data that I got for areas, the immediate areas around each property's location. And what I found was that nationwide, we see some properties or some cities that are more successful in terms of providing affordable transportation for housing affordable programs, which are, you see with more orange dots versus more red dots that are unaffordable. And when you look at Dallas, it seems it has more red dots than orange dots. Looking closer to the list of most affordable metro areas in terms of transportation costs, for affordable housing, you see San Francisco with the very impressive 100%. 156 units out of 156 units, affordable properties are affordable in terms of transportation. Los Angeles, Denver, New York, Portland, Minneapolis, going down to the list. Looking at the least affordable metro areas, we see a familiar name. in Dallas city, you see only 28% of affordable units are considered affordable after you account for transportation costs. We are spending millions of dollars on these units every year, annually. But what happens at the end of the day is that people who are living in these units are not getting anything good. They are spending more on transportation than on average households. Let's look at the map of Dallas in more details. I found households in this city that are spending 35% of their income on transportation. It's even more than housing. 30% on housing, 35% on transportation. And if you look at the map, you also see some special patterns. Areas that are least affordable versus areas in the north that are more affordable in terms of transportation cost. I tried to overlay this map with some other socio-demographic maps. Households below poverty level, as you see in the city of Dallas. Households receive food stamps. You see the same distribution of households as what you see on the earlier map. And households that are relying on public transit to get to jobs, the concentration of these people in the city of Dallas, where they are. Now let's look at where the jobs are. Looking at the job density and where the concentration of jobs are. Let's look more closely on where the low-wage jobs are. Again, you see they are in the opposite side of the city. I was curious to see, this is the snapshot looking at 2014. I was curious to see what is happening over time from 2002 to 2014, where the jobs are moving, where the people are moving, what do we see as the special pattern. And so I look at the 2002-2014 time frame, about 12 years time frame, and it was interesting what I saw. The blue areas are showing the areas that are losing low-wage, low-skill jobs. And the red areas are the areas that are getting more and more of these jobs over time. You see, they are even not within the boundary of the city of Dallas. They are not even in the areas that are served by DART. If you overlay that with the population trends over time, you see that the South Dallas is the areas that is gaining low-income population more and more, the concentration, the cluster of areas with low-income population over time. The areas in North Dallas outside of the boundary of the city is where the low-wage jobs are going. Definitely see the spatial mismatch here. People from these orange areas have to travel all the way to those red areas to get access to the jobs that fit their skill sets and their abilities. What is happening? What's the result? Is the city of Dallas being among one of the lowest cities with the lowest rates of upward mobility. A chance of a kid moving from bottom fifths of income distribution to top fifths in Boston is 10%. That the chance for that kid in DC is 11%, in San Jose, in Salt Lake City, and in Dallas is 7% only. And all the evidence is telling us that the trend is going toward more the cities in the west, southwest, that you see even lower and lower and lower chances of upward mobility. What it means is that our poor people are becoming poorer and poorer, and our affluent population are becoming more affluent and affluent. We are losing our middle class, and this gap is widening. What is happening over time is that the city of Dallas, which is now on a booming era, could be on on a declining era, being the next Detroit. And this is something that is, I've heard from one of you that we are thinking about South Dallas versus North Dallas. This is for the city of Dallas. This is affecting everyone. It's not for a particular district. It's not for a particular neighborhood. It's a city of Dallas that is providing less and less opportunities for its residents to have the chances of upward mobility. So what we can do about that? It's about making smart decisions on investments, not to see this spatial mismatch, not to see these patterns of the distributions of jobs and population. We should also rethink about our transit system. We should think about our transit system beyond functionality and mobility concerns. Our transit system should be planned as enablers, which is not right now doing that. We have the largest light rail system in the country, longest. And the question is how we can use the best out of existing transportation infrastructure. What are the action plans that we can do? Well, what is happening now is making empty spaces next to transit stations. A recent study by my colleagues, and I was part of that at the beginning of this study, found that on average about 19 to 30% of parking areas next to transit stations on the peak hour, peak occupancy rate is used. The rest of the time, they're empty. How about using those areas and directing developments to better, more compact, walkable, and transit-oriented locations? I also want to bring your attention to the assets we have in this region, and Dallas being the main drivers of all of them. Being in the fourth largest, first most fastest growing, third youngest, and sixth fastest growing labor force in the country. And we are not talking about labor force just in a general term. Dallas is a destination now, it has been the destination recently for creative class, for high-tech firms, for innovative companies that are all coming from all around the country to this city. These are all just assets. 40% of all Fortune 500 companies are in this region. And again, Dallas is the 40% of all Fortune 500 companies in Texas. So comparing to Austin, San Antonio, compared to Houston, we are having many more opportunities to utilize these assets. And one of the ways that I'm now studying how we can do that is through innovation districts. I truly believe that we can, by rethinking the way we are making decisions now, we can be the next Silicon Valley, not the next Detroit. And one of these ways that I've been studying how we can do that is through innovation districts, that are areas physically compact, transit-oriented, accessible, with mixed housing, office, and retails, and with mixed income distribution of people. The other ways to make smarter decisions, and the next steps for this research that I'm doing now, is creating a map of opportunity areas for the city of Dallas. Looking at access to major destinations for all census blocks in the city of Dallas by different transportation modes. Looking at access to jobs, access to high-quality schools, access to healthcare facilities, to healthy food, and to other amenities, and coming up with one comprehensive map of opportunity scores. Access to opportunity maps for the city of Dallas that shows us the areas that are offering more access to opportunities versus areas that are offering less, and help us to make more smarter decisions. Also, we're doing a comprehensive assessment of transportation equity and efficiency in Dallas, looking at transit quality, transit connectivity in terms of first mile, last mile of transit stations, looking at transit coverage and transportation decision making and funding structure that currently you see in the city of Dallas and DART and just all of these coordinations that could happen. And hopefully the result of this research will help us to make smarter decisions in terms of where the investments should go, and how we can leverage them. At the end, I just want to mention about one more opportunity that we have is the newly Transportation Research Center we got at UTA that is focusing on transportation equity decisions and dollars. And it's the largest transportation grant any universities in North Texas ever got from USDOT. It's a federal grant, and it's $7.5 million of grant that could be used on research and projects related to transportation equity in DFW and in the city of Dallas. We would love to work with all of you on the areas that you think needs more research and areas that we can collaborate together to make more informed decisions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Doctor. That was very interesting and a beginning to some really good ongoing work. And I think we might have some comments. Mr. Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought that was very interesting, Dr. Ramidi. And I really just wanted to say thank you and thank you to the University of Texas at Arlington, which has always been a good school, but is becoming really quite a remarkable school. And this is not the only group of scholars at the university that's working to help Dallas. The Urbanism Institute has done quite a bit of good work for free for our planning department. So when the state spends money on higher education institutions that then turn around and help cities develop, I think that's a pretty good use of our money. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kingston. Mr. McGue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know the page numbers, but there's a map here that's the hotspot analysis, low-wage jobs growth, 2002 to 14.
There's no page numbers.
I think.
Yeah.
I think two more. Okay, go back. That one, and then we'll look at the next one. The main thing I want to point out here is, first, thank you for capturing this data. This is one of the arguments / screaming I've been trying to make for a long time with my colleagues. As we look at this, it's growing issues around our areas in specifically my area in District 10, around 635 and Forest Aldelia, and some of these areas that are ever bit as increasing as it relates to the low-wage jobs and needs. And then if you go down to the next map, it shows the exact same thing, that it's not just a north and south issue there. And so I wanted to highlight that part of it. And then as we looked into more of the discussion around transportation, you said we need to plan our transportation system more as enablers. And could you explain to me what you mean by that?
Of course. Well, in a recent study I've done with my colleagues, we found that transportation is a key driver of economic mobility and upward mobility. And just having access to jobs, if you don't have access to jobs, you don't have any chance of getting them. It's just the physical access is the number one first thing that you should have. And if you look at this kind of access, which is the reason I'm going after access to opportunities map, is that the areas that include more disadvantaged populations, they are the least in terms of access to jobs. And I think those people's, those group of population are also, they have less flexibility in terms of transportation options. They don't have access to cars. If they have, their cars are usually older models, more expensive to maintain and use, not fuel efficient. And so it really comes into public transit. And we've never looked at public transit from this lens. Every time we talked about, okay, let's see where we can, provide mobility in general. But we have never looked at access to jobs for transit-dependent low-income population and how that impacts their life long-term, not only short-term, but it's a generational, kind of measures. And so I truly believe that we should be rethinking our transit system and the investments we are making on DART and the coordination that is happening between the city and DART.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Who's listening to you right now?
That's one of the reasons we're so excited to have Dr. Hamidi as a partner. Not only does she bring fascinating work, we give her a platform to and the visibility of this work is raised, and hopefully our partners at DART and RTC are listening.
Are we doing anything actively making these bridges right now? I mean, sharing this data proactively, getting the discussions happening at DART?
We will as soon as DART is part of our stakeholder team, especially the transit representatives have been part of our stakeholder teams. We've had just a couple of meetings, kind of launch meetings, but we haven't actually engaged in, we haven't completed the work to start the discussion yet. But yes, at a staff level.
So a while back, the city of Dallas passed a resolution guiding DART and giving information. What are we doing with that resolution? Because a lot of it in that resolution talked about the exact same things we're talking about here.
Right, and that's all. We're folding all that in together.
Okay, so we can expect something packaged around that going out soon, or what's the?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and can you talk a little bit more about innovation districts around our stations? And certainly, conceptually, I get it. But what practically, or what are we doing to further that? We have, there's subcommittees at DART around TOD and those kind of discussions. What are we doing to kind of facilitate that part of it as well?
That will be part of our stakeholder discussion. We've been talking about TOD for a long time. We actually got a HUD Challenge grant in 2008, Heather, 2009. To look at that. There are barriers to that. One of the barriers is DART owns a lot of land around these stations, and they frequently like to keep them for surface parking lots. There have been a couple of attempts by DART to engage in public-private partnerships with developers to bring affordable housing and mixed use to those stations, but they haven't been successful.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McEwen. Mr. Clayton, and then Mr. Callahan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Forgive me, because there wasn't page numbers. Will you go to the slide that talked about the inaffordability or unaffordability of transportation costs? It was right at the beginning of the presentation. So while we're getting there, no, up. You had it. Go back. It's one that's all red. There we go. I think this is the smartest thing you've done. I had the opportunity to get to moderate a panel that the doctor was on, and after a while I stopped asking questions because I didn't even know what to ask because, this work is brilliant. If I take any issue, not in a critical way, but where I think it gets lost in message is you were talking about like innovation in Silicon Valley. And I think this is where this all gets bumbled into a bigger mess, is we talk about DFW, and we are the board of directors for Dallas. The reason I bring that up is, yes, we can absolutely do that, but where we as a body have to really focus is exactly this. If you want the letter grade of if DART is passing, despite what the narrative is in the business community and from certain offices, there it is. That is basically my entire high school classes. Like, that is more reading than passing. I mean, that is an F in whatever F can be defined of in the most F'd way. It is F. Sorry, that sounded bad. although kind of true.
I'm with you.
Right. What I would really ask as an actionable is, however we do this, we should have a 5-page document that moving forward, when we do DART appointees, as the single biggest provider of dollars to DART, when I'm going to start going to every one of these transportation committee hearings, and I'm going to quiz people on this. Because if you do not have a basic knowledge, and I'm not even blaming people in the past, because frankly they didn't have it. And if you don't have access to data, then you're just kind of winging it up there, and you're a good person who wants to serve, and that's fine. But we, as a city, should have people who have a root understanding of this, because all of these issues that we talk about and that we talked about previously, we can't fix it because we have a DART system that we spend hundreds of millions of dollars on that doesn't work at all. I mean, take outside of your hipster that comes from Plano to downtown, and that's groovy and all, but the average person who is draining down our budget, our expenses are going up, our dollars are coming down, but we're still spending, nearly $200 million. It's more.
$260 million.
260 this year.
$260 million. Basically, a quarter of our general fund. I mean, imagine if we had $260 million in our general fund, what we could do. We could do everything we wanted to do in this city and more. And we spend $250 million a year to a body that has no accountability, no metrics, no desire to change, other than a handful of influential business leaders in the region and at the RTC saying we want it to be longer and we want it to go to WinStar. Like that's what their strategy is. And until you have a gridded bus system that moves people away from just the whole design of the bus system is to get people to the light rail, so that then you can justify the measurement of success by ridership of rail, and to fixing this is what it is. This is the F. See, I fixed it this time. So, I mean, I would really encourage us to change. Well, we have got to start taking seriously our appointees and giving them data that they can make a judgment on. And if they can't fix this, then they failed, and we shouldn't have them on there. So that would be my ask. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I think in this study area, I'm excited that we will be bringing you concrete policy recommendations for how to address this kind of situation.
Excellent. It's so badly needed. Before we get to Mr. Callahan, I just want to say I agree with everything Mr. Clayton just said. Mr. Callahan.
All right. I just want to go back to that thing about transit-oriented development there. We had I think a HUD challenge grant or opportunity grant of about $250,000 for the Buckner and Elam station there, but we still haven't been able to move the needle in spite of having an awardee on that. We also have quite a bit of acreage at the Lake June Transit Center, and we've just we're not envisioning Mockingbird Station, but hey, we can dream, can't we? Maybe we can get some mixed use there. Now, there has been a couple of people stirring about doing something, but as you mentioned, they are looking for expansion of parking lots and so forth. There may have to be some parking garages built there, to be able to accommodate that, to kind of do a land switch. And that, interestingly enough, was what was going to be at the Buckner Elam station, was going to be to take some of the existing surface parking, fold that into development, then have a master plan with a parking garage, so 2, 3, 4 levels, something like that. But those things could work. But yeah, going back to DART's history, they took the low-hanging fruit of the existing rail corridors because guess what? It was real cheap land. It was available. It was the pathway of least resistance, if you will. Now, obviously, once upon a time, 30, 40, 50 years ago, that's where the jobs were. But at this point, they're not. They've moved. They've changed. And so we don't have the heavy industrial jobs in southern Dallas the way we once did back 50, 60 years ago. Ford Motor Company, the steel companies, some of those things moved out. But what we're going to have to do going forward, now that we have that general footprint or layout, we're going to have to add to that. And just what Mr. Clayton was indicating, we're going to have to make sure that we go to the job centers. Any money we spend in the future has to be cognizant of where those jobs are. Right now, the best fix is express bus service, feeding those DART lines. But then also, once we get to the destination or the end point of those lines, then we're going to have express buses going out to the job centers. It does make sense otherwise, but the reason it's got to be express, and they've got to be every 5 minutes in case people miss, in case it's raining, sleeting, snowing, hailing, hot or cold, they've got to be able to get in there and get going. They don't want to have a 2-hour transit trip, when there's only 20, 30 minutes, away by car. There's a disincentive, to really to go ahead and take your car because it's not reliable. Nobody wants to get up as Eric Wilson, our Eric Wilson with a K. He likes to say, I had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and get out there to get on that bus and all that stuff to go kind of northwest Dallas or Las Colinas. Well, that's ludicrous. Nobody's really going to do that. So you're not going to take those jobs, so you're going to probably take a job that's $9 or $10 or whatever. You're going to be underemployed because you're just not going to have that whipping away from your family to be able to get to and fro. So we've just got to do a better job. It's got to be global. It's got to be intelligent. It's got to be sophisticated. And I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
Ms. Young.
Yes, I just want to say I do agree with my colleagues as well. We know that this is an issue, and one of the things that always concerns me as we talk about transportation is that we continue to look at it in silos. This DART issue here and this toll road issue there, and we never really look at transportation globally in the city. And so I hope that we will begin to do more of that, and then just even looking at it in terms of quality of life issues and how it really affects quality of life in many communities. As Councilman Callahan was just saying, that here's a quality of life issue when someone has to get up so early, and that's more hours away from home or more hours away from family because they're having to spend it. A lot of them do take those jobs because they don't have another job to take, and so they do take that job that's far away from home. And I've read the stories and talked to people where, then they even still have long walks to the job, either on the front end or the back end. And so, that affects health. And so you begin to really see how it affects all the different areas of someone's life. And so I hope that we will begin as a city and as a council to really look at these projects in a holistic manner and in a global manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Young. I just wanted to mention, could we go to the map that Mr. McGue went to that had where all the jobs are in the north and where all the need is in the south? That one. All those cities there where all the jobs are being provided don't belong to a transit agency. Yeah. So they're using their 1 cent sales tax on economic development, and they're pulling the jobs away from us, and yet we're using our 1 cent to provide transportation options to clean up the air. So, and what is DART doing? They're going up to those cities and saying, how can we contract with you and provide you some service, instead of looking at its member cities like Dallas and saying, how can we better serve the people who live in your city? And they keep resisting doing better bus service. I've been talking to DART about better bus service since 1991, when I first got on the DART board. It still isn't a good bus system. And what are they doing? They're building more rail. They're actually building a rail line that runs east and west that will help our northern cities better compete against us economically. And our DART board members voted for that, instead of putting the money into better bus service. So as Mr. Clayton mentioned, we're going to have much better scrutiny of who goes on that DART board from the city of Dallas, and have them look at what the need is in Dallas, which is better bus service. And so I think Mr. Clayton made a comment some months back about what's the good of having the longest rail line when you're not serving the people who need public transit. So I just think there's so much discussion that I hope you will be having with DART. And I hope they're receptive to it, because so far they have not been. And the timing that you have is really good. They're doing their 2040 transit system plan update now. And I think they'll be voting on that in the fall. And so if you sit down with them, and, I think all of us would like to get involved in that and ask them to provide better bus service and start really serving the transit-dependent population here that needs to be served. I just know that this council is going to give you a lot of support in that effort. So I did want to ask you, Doctor, you had a slide, a slide talking about how San Francisco was one of the more. Can you explain that a little more? Because their housing costs are hugely unaffordable.
This can be done. If San Francisco, Boston, Washington, D.C., L.A. have figured this out. This can be done. It's an effective bus system.
So can you explain that slide a little more to me? Because some of the ones at the top of the list are the most expensive places to live in the United States.
Absolutely. So here we are talking about affordable housing programs. So these programs are already affordable in terms of housing cost. So if the housing cost is more than 30%, that the remaining part of that will be paid by HUD or other agencies to make it affordable for low-income people. So the housing part is affordable, but these housing units, for example, in Dallas, are located in the middle of nowhere, in areas that are not accessible, not close to transit. So people, of course, they get subsidies for housing costs. So even though the housing in general in San Francisco is expensive, the low-income people get subsidies for these units. So the housing is affordable for them. But also these units are located in accessible, transit-oriented, walkable locations, so people end up spending less than 10% of their income on transportation. So when we see is the overall affordability is working perfectly for San Francisco, low-income families who are using affordable units in San Francisco, versus in Texas or in Dallas, we are putting them in the middle of the nowhere, probably because land is cheaper. I don't know what is the reason. But what is happening is that household spends less than 30% on housing because the remaining will be subsidies that is provided to them. But they end up spending 35% on transportation.
I think part of what you're saying might be that those cities have better transportation systems than we do, making the ability of folks to live closer to bus or rail or whatever much more likely. They have more ability to live closer because there are more transportation options provided.
Yes, that's what this slide says.
Yeah. I mean, I know when I lived in San Francisco many years ago, I mean, they were starting BART, but they had buses and they had trolleys and they had just all kinds of ways to get around that city conveniently. Of course, that's a smaller city than we are geographically and in population, but still in all, it was easy to get around that city.
But L.A. is a high-cost housing city, and it's more spread out than Dallas, and they're doing better.
That's true. You're right.
Yes.
L.A. is much more spread out. Well, as some of my colleagues have said, this is fascinating, and I hope you keep working on it, and I hope you can get DART to really sit down at the table and listen, something they're not really good at. I hope you can get them to do that. So, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Love when you come and do these resiliency things because it's really meaty. We can just really get into these things. Thank you, Doctor, for coming.
Thanks for the opportunity.
So we will, the next item is an informational memo about our 2017 mosquito abatement plan. Do any committee members have any questions for Mr. Zapata or any other staff about this? It's basically saying how we're going to be moving this program and doing it for this particular year. And mosquito season starts when, Mr. Zapata?
April 1st.
April 1st.
Saturday.